All right, so welcome back. Here we are, and we're going to go ahead and look at some notes on Immanuel Kant today, which I know is very exciting to you. It's very exciting to me as well. All right, so let's begin by looking at some of the buildup. As we can see, that we are in the period of German idealism. We're in the period of the Enlightenment, as the case may be. Europe is coming out of the Dark Ages, as you may remember from your Western Civ classes. And they have received quite a bit of information, which you probably recall from your Eastern Civ classes, about some of the philosophical traditions that have gone on before. So there's all sorts of traditions of people talking about utopia and getting back to the Greek-Roman ideal. There's Spinoza, who believes that the universe is made up of these mathematical equations, that we're all just kind of waiting and hoping and praying to discover, as the case may be. And there's Hobbes, who comes in and gives us this idea of atheism and materialism. The existence of nothingness. So we are just atoms in the voids. George Berkeley, actually a bishop, is going to talk quite a bit about this. We'll get into that in just a moment. John Locke, Bacon, I mean, all of these people, what is important about this? What's important about this is that these folks are in communication with one another. And Immanuel Kant, I mentioned it in the introduction to this, but Immanuel Kant is not, I repeat, is not this impossible philosopher to understand. He is a brilliant man, much like Plato, as well as Aristotle. I would say that in terms of full philosophical, meatiness, that he's one of your top guys of all time, without a doubt, right up there with Plato. But he's in conversation with this, and this is happening because it's in the Enlightenment. It's in the Enlightenment. Europe is coming out of the Dark Ages. We have all of this philosophy available to us, and he is the person who is able to kind of match it together. So that's pretty impressive. So you have a guy like George Berkeley who just kind of gives up. And you can see him in his little picture here that he is more or less, and this is on slide 6, he's more or less believes that everybody exists in order to kind of reenact the play within his head, if you will. So everybody is here for the specific and inherent reason of pleasing him. Nothing exists outside of his mind. That is to say that nothing exists outside of his 5 senses, his ability to see, to touch, to do all of those types of things. This is in stark contrast to Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, not the tiger, who believes that material things are those that exist regardless of what our perception of them is. So Hobbes is a believer that there are things out there that are yet to be discovered, that have yet to be invented, and that's important for us to understand. Excuse me, I've been a little sick lately. So all of this brings us into Immanuel Kant. Why is this important? It's important only to see that this is a man who has a lot of ideas spinning out around him. He's heavily influenced by his parents, who are very, very pious Christians, living in the edge of Prussia. He is right there in smack dab in the middle of the European Enlightenment, which is going to kind of shape his thought process, and he's going to see a lot of different people who are around him. But we don't need to know as much about him and his biography as we do need to know about Karl Marx, for instance. Even though they're from similar areas and from even a similar time frame, but Marx and the bigotry that he really experienced as a Jew growing up in Prussia is not going to be the case with Kant. Kant is one of those rare individuals, much like Plato, again, I'll make the same comparison, who kind of transcends his biography. Kant's ideas would have been just as relevant and as important to us today as they would have been in 1740 when he first started to develop them, as they would have been in 1300 had he developed them then, as they would have been in 4 BC if he had developed them right next to Plato. So there's not too much that we need to know about him. Although, I mean, the interplay between the science and the Christianity and the religion thing is important to him because he is growing up in a time period where, you know, the scientific method is becoming all the rage. We're starting to make chemical discoveries or chemistry discoveries. So he believes in methods for things. He believes that it is important for us to develop proper methods in order to do things, if you will. So therefore, for him, and here we are, we're on number 10, for Kant, it all starts with pure, unadulterated reason. And this is where we get the name of his first book, The Critique of Pure Reason. It's the means by which we examine our motives and understandings of the human conditions. We understand the limitations of the human mind based on this exploration. So he develops a system of a scientific method, if you will, that we can develop in order to define what we can and cannot know. I mean, it's very simple in this idea. This is, as you know, we give vocabulary to the types of things that we use. This is his epistemology, all right? Kant believes that there are things that we can understand and that there are things that we do not understand, but they are still an important part of our lives. So, for instance, I know that I need to do laundry today because I do not have a lot of clean clothing left. I know that if I put my hand on a hot stove that it will be burned. This is sensory experience, and this is analytical experience, all right? I cannot tell by my senses that my clothes are dirty unless I smell them, and they smell particularly putrid. But I do know that based on the human condition, that if I take Kevin, who has not, you know, showered or been cleaned in quite some time in a day, and he wears clothing all day, the clothing may not smell so bad because if you recall, you know, human beings have lived for thousands upon thousands of years without doing laundry as often as we do. But I know that based on my social norms and all the different information that I put in front of me, that that it's dirty. I'm supposed to wash it. And therefore we get some kind of a mathematical type of information. All right, so Kant proposes, and I think we'll start calling him Manny at this point. Manny proposes 3 basic types of human knowledge, and I think that this is pretty impressive for him at the time. Excuse me. First of all, the majority of our knowledge that we know, learn, and experience is empirical. Here we are, we're on slide 11. That means that the majority of the knowledge that we understand comes from our 5 senses. We know things based on how we experience them. All right. So I know what a tree is because I've seen the tree. I've seen them in books. I've felt them. I've seen what they do and how they react, etc., etc., etc. That is how I know what a tree is. I cannot come up with a mathematical equation that will use imaginary numbers in the quadratic formula in order for me to arrive at my understanding of what a tree is. However, I can create analytical statements when I have formulas and different systems that I can hypothesize what results are based on other types of findings. So, you know, this is what the scientific method is based on. If I, you know, burn a tissue and I see how quickly it lights on fire, if I have a similar, you know, piece of paper, or if I have another piece of paper, I can be fairly certain that it too will burn. I would never pick up a tissue and a paper towel, and even though the consistency of the two is different, say that, well, it would be impossible for me to believe that the paper towel will also burn. This must be something that is not a flammable object. That's foolish. This is absolutely foolish. I give you the example here that I am terrified of flying. I've never experienced a plane crash, and yet I am afraid of flying. I am afraid of flying because I know that even though it is highly unlikely for the plane to crash, that if it does, I have a very, very low possibility of surviving the plane crash based on verifiable data of plane crashes. So when we see a plane crash, it's very rare that we have a gentleman, a pilot like Sullenberger there, who's able to land the plane on the Hudson River, and everybody's able to escape gracefully and peacefully. More likely to happen is if the plane is going down, nobody's gonna make it out. So that is a kind of system or type of knowledge, analytical knowledge, that I can derive at based on the system that I've created, based on a mathematical proposition, more or less. The last one, number 3, and here we are on slide number 12, is a little bit more difficult. This is synthetic a priori knowledge. All right, and Kant proposes that we know things, we intuit things that does not have any kind of basis in our sensory experience or our scientific knowledge, our hypothetical knowledge of systems. This becomes difficult to understand. We have to play with this a little bit, because if the knowledge is not based on any of our 5 senses, which is the way that we experience the material world, all right, so I cannot experience the material world if I cannot see the material world, although I may be able to use the 4 other senses that I have. If I don't have any of those senses, I can't move, talk, smell, etc., 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 see, then my life is drastically different from yours if you have the ability to do all of those things. Even if somebody is, say, colorblind, they experience the world in a very, very different way than you do if you are not colorblind. When we take that away, so we say that a priori, synthetic a priori knowledge is knowledge that has nothing to do with sensory experience. That eliminates 95% of the way that we know things. If we take that and then we also exclude all of our scientific method and our mathematical equations, our logical deductions, because that's basically what he's talking about when he talks about analytical knowledge. He's talking about logical deductions, okay? So I know if A, then B. I know that if I put my hand through a plate glass window, that I will probably cut my hand. I don't need to do that in order for it to happen. I know that because I know that glass is breakable, and I know that my hand is not, made of steel. All right? And these sound like silly ideas, but these sound like silly examples, but they help to prove the point. So this knowledge, the synthetic a priori knowledge, is knowledge that is apart from all of those other things. We just know it. That is difficult for us to understand. So there's a nice little cartoon here on slide number 13